important discussion. This is a wonderful venue, and thanks for all the help that they have provided. This forum is in one way bittersweet for me because I'm set to leave the FCC at the end of the month, and this will be my last stop outside the Beltway before I take leave of Mignon and my other colleagues. Over my 10 years at the Commission, I have made it my priority to get out of Washington and engage citizens in conversations on what is needed from our media to inform not just this community, but every community across the land. I've participated in dozens and dozens of hearings, town hall gatherings, public forums of all kinds from coast to coast, from huge cities to Indian country, from south to north and all directions in between. And here's what I've learned. I've learned that people want more from the media than they're getting. That many of you and your neighbors and the person down the street have serious concerns about the media you are receiving on a daily basis. That the huge cutbacks we have seen in newsrooms and the number of journalists plying their trade is not serving this democracy well. That something valuable and precious has gone missing, and that a lot of people, millions of people, want to repair what's broken. A number of years ago, the then chairman of the FCC wanted to loosen our media ownership rules that limited the number of stations that one company could own. It was an absolutely horrible idea, highly detrimental to diversity of voices and viewpoints, damaging to the preservation of localism and to the advancement of competition that our media so desperately needs. But they told me nobody cares about it outside the confines of Washington, D.C. and the Beltway. It's too technical, it's too arcane, we can handle it here. Well, my fellow commissioner at that time, Jonathan Adelstein, and I begged to differ. And we took to the road. And we attended hearing after hearing, long into the night, listening to people, hearing their concerns. And suddenly we saw around us a movement building for a better media. And 3 million people, 3 million people contacted the Commission and the Congress saying Chairman Powell's rules were exactly the wrong way to go. So the Senate voted to disapprove what he managed to ram through the Commission in spite of the popular outcry. The House was debating it, and then the Third Circuit Court told us the rules were flawed in substance, flawed in process, and they sent it back to the FCC where we're still talking about it. But there's an important point here, and it's that citizen action can still count, even in these times when so few people wield such outrageous power. Citizens can still make a difference. You just try to tell John Lewis that grassroots movements don't work. To make a long story short, here to my way of thinking is what went wrong with the media. The story has a private sector part, and it has a public sector part. For 30 years and more, private sector media consolidation has seen more and more broadcast outlets bought up by the hundreds as a few mega media companies gobbled up small, local, independent entities that created huge empires where they could standardize programming, cut back on what Wall Street considered non-essential parts of their business, like spending on hard news and reflecting the diversity of their communities of service, all the while trying to show the captains of industry that they were subservient to the bottom line and the quarterly report. Stakeholders, that's the people the stations are supposed to serve, that's you and me. You go to the back of the bus, it's the stockholders who go to the front, and that became the new modus operandi. It was and is a far cry from the original broadcaster commitment to serve the public interest in return for free use of the people's airwaves. The result has been hundreds of newsrooms shuttered, thousands of reporters walking the street in search of a job rather than walking the beat in search of a story, and real hard-hitting investigative journalism put on the endangered species list. Real news too often replaced by glitzy infotainment. hard facts by shouted opinions, and local and regional music by stultifying, creativity-killing playlists and national music homogeneity. Even those station owners who tried to resist, and there were many who did, and who still do, who still try to serve the public interest, even they came under incredible pressure to cave. It made it much harder for them to do their job and to be good stewards of the public airwaves than many of them still want to be. And even today, the speculative fires burn on, and we see merger after merger. We see Comcast, NBCU, Cumulus and Citadel, Sinclair buying up more stations. As soon as the economy starts getting better, you're going to see even more of it. To make this the perfect storm, though, the private sector debacle was blessed and even encouraged by the public sector. And this, to me, is the saddest part of the tale. The place where I work, the Federal Communications Commission, was at the center of it all, blessing the consolidation tsunami, seldom finding a merger they didn't like, and then making things even worse by eliminating almost all of the public interest guidelines and enforcement that once upon a time we had on the books, rules and procedures that had been fought for and won by generations of media reformers. And when the internet and the promise of a new media came along, the two previous FCCs to this one helped the big companies travel down the same misguided road that radio and TV and cable had gone down. Consolidation blessed by government, no real public interest oversight, and access to perhaps the most dynamic and opportunity-creating technology ever devised put into the hands of a few huge telecommunications giants. I don't think we want the future of the internet to be cableization. New media offers tremendous opportunities, but it is not anywhere close to being on autopilot to rescue us from the wreckage of traditional media. There could be a wonderful new town square of democracy on the internet, paved with broadband bricks. But truth be told, 90 to 95% of the news that we read on the internet every day still originates in that traditional newspaper newsroom and the TV broadcast newsroom. It's just that there's so much less of it than there used to be. And while there are all sorts of interesting experiments and innovations taking place on the internet, so far there is no model to support the kind of resource-intensive journalism that democracy really requires. And we haven't yet replaced in new media what we've lost in traditional. So it is that we find ourselves at the present moment with radio and TV news and information just shells of their former selves, shilling programs that encourage a dumbed-down civic dialogue based too often on fluff. And to my way of thinking, democracy is not well served by fluff. A well-informed electorate is the premise and prerequisite of functioning self-government. Right now, your country and mine faces some really deadly, serious challenges. Our economy founders. Our global competitiveness has lost its edge. Nearly a fifth of the workforce is unemployed or underemployed. Our education lags and our teachers suffer as much as the kids. 50 million Americans have no health insurance. If we don't have a media that can dig for facts, cover the beats, separate fact from opinion, hold the powerful accountable, then tell me please, how in the world are we going to meet and master these challenges? How are we going to ever overcome? To me, getting our journalism and our media right is step number one in getting our democracy right. And you know, there's a real irony here. When the actions of government weaken the fourth estate, as has happened over these past 3 decades, there's less of a check on government itself. The estimable David Simon, creator of The Wire and former journalist at the Baltimore Sun, hit the nail on the head recently when he said, quote, "The next 10 or 15 years in this country are going to be a halcyon era for state and local political corruption," end quote. And it's going to take a lot more vibrant and vigorous journalism than we have now to keep that from coming true. But it's not just the accountability stories or the things gone wrong stories that need to be told. As Congressman Lewis so movingly pointed out, there's good news out there too, although we don't get to see a lot of it on TV. You live in a diverse community with lots of people doing lots of interesting and often lots of very good things. How often do those stories manage to get through the if it bleeds, it leads mentality that seems to dictate so much news? I'm a strong believer that if we want more diversity in our stories, if we want to understand what's really going on in our communities, then we need more diversity in who owns our media outlets. But here's the reality of ownership diversity. In a nation that is now 1/3 minority, people of color hold only about 3.5% of full power commercial television stations. So should we really be surprised that we see in our media things that don't even come close to what's actually happening in our communities? Talk about an area where the Commission needs to take some positive action to break down barriers. There it is. There are so many abuses out there. Here's another example. Some broadcasters are doing end runs around our media ownership limits by way of so-called shared services agreements. That's just kind of a fancy term for covert consolidation that lets one company control and manage another company without formally transferring the title or the ownership. It's something we should not tolerate. But just last week, our Media Bureau actually dismissed a complaint against the shared service agreement, even while admitting that the arrangement was at odds with the purpose and intent of our rules on duopolies. You've got to figure that one out. I can't. I guess we'll get to it later. But it just seemed to me that this might have been a case where we should have acted on behalf of the public interest instead of kicking the can down the road. There's one final issue, and I'll hush. It's about all those political ads we're subjected to on television and the lack of clarity and transparency that surrounds them. And get ready, we got 11 months ahead of us now with carpet bombing political ad saturation like we've never seen before. We are not well served when those who are attempting to manipulate our political dialogue and trying to determine the outcome of elections through these ads can disguise themselves and hide behind misleading names. If there's a group calling itself Citizens for Purple Mountain Majesties, and it's in reality the mouthpiece of a company that's refusing to clean up a toxic dump or is spewing garbage into one of the Great Lakes, don't citizens have a right to know that? Open government can only exist where people and groups trying to influence elections stand up and tell us who they are and who is footing the bill for those ads. And that's not happening often enough, and the fissures in our democracy are only going to widen if anonymous money retains its unchecked influence in our elections. The FCC has the authority to do something about it right now, and it's time to use that authority and to require a fuller sponsorship identification of the special interests who are bankrolling so many of these ads. I'll leave you with this. 40 years in Washington have convinced me that while some change, sometimes important change, can come from the top down, real change comes from the grassroots up. It comes because the people demand it and mobilize to make it happen. Abraham Lincoln was a great president, but there would have been no Emancipation Proclamation without the abolitionists and other reformers who demanded action. Franklin Roosevelt is my personal hero, but there would have been no Social Security and other New Deal programs without labor organizations, consumer groups, and a host of other reform advocates pressing him to move ahead. John F. Kennedy came to support civil rights, but there would have been no such conversion without Martin Luther King and John Lewis and a host of other heroes and crusaders who led and marched and insisted on the cause of freedom. It is no different in our time. Here in media democracy is a cause that goes to the roots of self-government, an issue that just about every other issue depends upon if we are really going to overcome. So I hope when you leave here tonight, you'll think about this. Some of you will answer the call. You'll talk to your families and friends about it. You'll speak out, write, sing, march, whatever you can do. Tell the FCC what you think, but don't stop there. Tell all those who make public policy what you think. Use every outlet you can. And as for me, I may be leaving the commission soon, but I can guarantee you this. I intend to keep speaking out and working hard on this challenge. It is too important to stop now. It's too important for you not to be involved. We can do this. We can make it happen. And then, as citizens united, I believe we can realize the dream of media of, by, and for the American people. Media democracy. I like the sound of that term, and I hope you will agree. Thank you very much.